Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first Manx Wildlife Trust Zoom webinar for people to join a Wild Night In. We've got a programme for you this evening. My name's Leigh Morris. I'm CEO of Manx Wildlife Trust, if you don't know me. And this evening we've got an introduction from our chair, Viv Davies, who I'll pass to shortly. And then we've got three presentations. Firstly, from Andree Dubbeldam, our Conservation Officer. Andree's going to tell you about a project he's leading on and has been leading on for a number of years. Then I'm going to pass to Aron Sapsford, our Calf of Man Bird Warden. Aron's going to tell you about the season on the calf. I'm going to then wrap up at the end with a little bit about our strategy, the highlights, some highlights of the second half of 2020 and do a summary of the whole evening. Before I pass to our chair, oh, two more people want to come in. I'll give them a chance to join. Welcome to Kathy and Mike, just joined us. My name's Leigh Morris, I'm the CEO. I'm just doing an introduction. Before I pass to Viv, our chair, I'll do a short tutorial. So for those of you that don't know how to use Zoom, don't worry, we're learning every time we do this as well. Every day's a school day. There's two things I'm going to just go through to aid your experience, or maybe three. One is you can switch your cameras off. I see a couple of you've got them on. You're very welcome to leave them on. People have different conventions on that, but by all means, leave them on, switch them off, whatever you're comfortable with. I have muted you all. What we'll do at the end, if people have got questions, probably the best thing is you can either ping me one in the chat box, I'll come to that, or you can put your camera on and wave frantically at me, or there's a virtual way you can put your hand up as well if you know how to do that. But we would certainly encourage questions from participants after each talk. We'll do questions after each talk. The chat function at the bottoms of your screens, I'm not sure if some of you might be watching this on computers, some of you might be on iPads or on smartphones, but somewhere on there will be a chat box button. On most computers, it's at the bottom of the screen. And if you click on the chat box, up will come various conversations, messages from people to people in the chat. So what I would encourage you to do, please, is if you've got any questions for the speaker, please can you send them, you can either put them for everyone and I'll pick them up if you want other people to know the questions you're asking, or you can send them direct to me. You may have got emails saying send your questions to my Manx Wildlife Trust email address. If you do that, I'll double check, but I'm going to encourage you first and foremost to put them in the chat box. Put them in the chat box, or again, we may have chance. You're more likely to get your question asked if you put it in the chat box so that I've got them on my little hit list. And what was the last thing? Oh, two more coming in. The last thing I'm going to go through on the tutorial is, again, to aid your experience, you'll probably have lots of little boxes on the screen. On the screen, you can actually have two different ways you view this. If you go to the top right of your screen, you can either click on speaker view or gallery view. And if you flick between if you're on speaker view, you'll just have me on the screen now with a yellow box around me. And therefore you get more of an experience, particularly when we're all showing PowerPoint slides. So I would encourage you all to make sure you're on speaker view to get rid of all the multiple little screens and just have the one big screen of the speaker. I hope that aids your experience. Right, no one else in the chat room. So without further ado, I shall pass over to Viv Davies, Chair of Manx Wildlife Trust. Viv, I'm going to try and unmute you. As it scrolls down, there we go. So ask to unmute. Viv, over to you.
Okay, thanks Leigh. Good evening and welcome to a Wild Night In. And thank you for joining this, the first webinar organised by Manx Wildlife Trust, and I look forward to more over the coming year. 2020 has been an exceptional year. The most important and positive for Manx Wildlife Trust was Leigh taking up his post on the 13th of January as our new Chief Executive. Shortly, Leigh will be taking us through his first year, as well as the new strategy, which I hope many of you have had a chance to look at, either in our newsletter or on our website. I hope you have the bookmark, which supplies a summary. If not, please ask for one the next time you're in our Peel shop. As Chair of MWT, it is one of my key roles to ensure that we have the strongest possible Council of Trustees to provide oversight and direction. In this way, we can give most help to Leigh and his team of staff and volunteers to deliver our exciting strategy. To this end, you may recall the article in the last newsletter, and more recently, reference in the press, that we are currently looking to expand our existing team of trustees. And if you feel you have the enthusiasm and skills to become involved as a new trustee or as a member of one of our committees, please refer to the website for more details. There you will find a role description and how to apply. The application period closed on the 29th of January, so you can have lots of thoughts over Christmas and New Year. Don't dwell on the difficulty, I won't dwell on the difficulties we have all been dealing with in 2020. This is not to underrate them, as they have had a profound effect, but rather to take the opportunity to celebrate the fact that MWT has managed to continue its vital conservation and restoration work. First, Andree and then Aron will review and update us on their specific areas of work, the Ramsey Forest Project and the Calf of Man Bird Observatory season. I'm sure you'll enjoy this webinar and be inspired by what is being achieved. I hope you will be, or become, continue to be or become, involved in MWT's exciting plans. As you will see from your bookmark, as and when you get one, namely to create more places for wildlife, enable nature to improve the wider environment for all, and inspire us all, the people of the Isle of Man, to act for wildlife. Thank you. I'll pass back to Leigh.
Thank you, Viv. I don't get the chance to say this and often embarrass my board chair, my boss, but I have to say, having been in a few boards and different things, I'm delighted to have Viv as our chair. I think she's amazing value for Manx Wildlife Trust and seems to chair everything. As I said to her last night, if you chair 40 groups, why not 41? But brilliant. So thank you. Okay, I'm now going to pass to Andree. So Andree, I'm going to make you the host. Let me just do this.
Okay, I've got the power. Okay, I'm going to share a screen. Right, there we are. I hope everyone can see this. Leigh, put a thumbs up if you can see it, please. Brilliant. Okay, we're rocking and rolling. So my presentation this evening is just about what we are informally calling the Hairpin Woodland Park, or the Ramsey Hairpin Woodland Park, which is a project we've been working on for a while now. So probably at least for 10 years, the Manx Wildlife Trust has been aware that it really doesn't have a great public engagement site. It's got its visitor centres and it's got its nature reserves, but it hasn't got an area where you come together. Now, what I'm really hoping for is that tonight I'll just be able to describe to you as the Manx Wildlife Trust's premier public engagement site. It probably all took off about 5 years ago when the Ramsey Forest Project was launched. Now, the Ramsey Forest Project was created in 2014, actually, and it is a project between Ramsey and Sulby, about 20 square kilometres of land that are the most wooded parts of the island. And the essential idea is if we do nothing on that land, nature is going to turn about 20% of woodland cover to 30%. And the way nature is going to do that is that there is an awful lot of bracken and gorse land that are not particularly well grazed there. Or I say not particularly well grazed, they're often not grazed. So there are large areas that are naturally becoming woodland. Trees are just seeding themselves into there. And from Manx Wildlife Trust perspective, we thought that is a good opportunity for us to capitalise on a natural bounty. Hence the Ramsey Forest Project was born. And we saw at the core of the Ramsey Forest, we have the hairpin at Ramsey and Clubane Plantation and woodlands around Clubane Plantation that have the potential to become so much more. The vision that we have developed over the last 5 years has been ever expanding, really, as we realise that the hairpin has got so much to offer. It is a site that's iconic on the Isle of Man. And if I just wobble my cursor a little bit, hopefully you can see this. This is the hairpin itself. And as I wobble my cursor over, we're moving over westwards to Crossers. Now, the map you see in front of us was a map drawn up of a potential 80-acre site. And the reason I'm talking to you about this now is that this is a project that is about to go from conceptual to reality, but we don't yet know what that reality is going to be. So we don't really know if it's going to be an 80-acre site. The areas where I'm wobbling my cursor over now are woodland sites, and we don't have any kind of management over them at the moment, but we just have this potential. We have this idea that we will hopefully extend the landholding there to include them. Now, the largest part of the site is owned by the Isle of Man government, DEFA, and that's this area here, which is Clebain Plantation, and this area here, which is the Nut Glen, which a lot of people don't know about. It's a beautiful little glen tucked away just behind Crosseggs. It's also one of the largest oak woodlands here on the Isle of Man. And then the Manx Wildlife Trust have bought a little nature reserve right in the middle here called Crosseggs, or Crosseggs Coppice, which we've planted up. So that was planted up about 5 years ago, and the trees are growing away quickly. What we've got now, sorry, I'm just going to admit someone because I don't think Leah's got the authority to do it. Okay, what we have got is a site that has lots of potential for many things. Now, I'm just going to move you guys out of the way a little bit. So it's a new destination, hopefully an up to 80-acre woodland, but we don't know exactly how big it's going to be. And it's for a number of purposes. So for wildlife, for health, for awareness, and for the planet. And when I say for awareness, we're really talking about public engagement. And I guess that was one of the key reasons why we've done it. Then lots of have fun from it. Sorry, I'm just going to minimize everyone here. So to give you a few examples, first of all, of the wildlife interest, at the moment, the site is brilliant for bats. It's really, really good. All but one of the Manx species of bats are found there, and they're found there in quite large numbers. But the really exciting thing there is that most of the woodland is not great. It's conifer plantation. And as we gradually turn those conifer plantations into native woodland, that will soar up the amount of insects. And with the insects going up, the amount of bats will go up. The number of old trees are developing as well. So most of this was planted post-World War I, and a lot of those trees are now starting to develop lots more cavities, lots more interest for bats for hibernacular. So loads more bats. We're expecting that. There is almost no, if you remember the first slide of Little Girl in Bluebells, that's the site of about 10 million bluebells. 10 million bluebells is roughly actually turn this woodland into a native woodland. Those millions of bluebells will turn into maybe 100 million bluebells. Essentially a kilometre-long walk of pure bluebell woodland, which will be just stunning. And also one of the most significant nectar sources for solitary bees and bumblebees earlier on in the season. So a huge nectar hit for those. At the moment, we've got 10 rare species recovery programs. And within a few years, what we want is those recovery programs to lead to 10 rare species that are absolutely thriving. And in fact, the rarest species we've got there, which is a little grass called wood melick. A couple of years ago, this was just couple of plants near Narrowdale, and now it's virtually a weed on site at Clubane. It's growing everywhere and growing really fast, so hugely successful. And we want the other 9 species to become equally as successful over time. We've developed 7 acres of coppice creation. I'd love to talk more about coppice creation and what coppice is, but I think I will be cut short on time. But essentially what I'm going to say is in a few years, what we want is 7 acres of working coppice, which will be great for the bats and will be great for the birds and the insects. Currently, about 40% of the site is native woodland. And as I said, big ambitions to turn the plantations into native woodland over time. And that will happen quite gradually. We probably won't do much clear felling unless it's dictated by disease. So the woodlands will gradually be converted to native woodland. And we're aiming for about 90% native woodland and virtually 0% conifer, but about 20% open land. So lots of glades. We want to help recover ash trees. So ash trees on the Isle of Man are having a really hard time of it because of ash dieback. And what we are looking to do is identify those trees within Clubane that are showing tolerable resistance, and we will graft those onto new rootstock and produce essentially an ash tree orchard. So that's just a snapshot of some of the conservation goals we're looking for. For people then, I guess really it's headline is talking to people we wouldn't normally talk to. That's the biggest challenge. But specifically what we're going to put in there, a loop where people can perhaps on a drive home from Douglas into Ramsey, can just have a 20-minute jog around the site, nature trail, and double up as a walking track as well and a rambling track, whatever you want. There is already a lovely little tots trail. We've had contractors in who have built lovely little woodland shacks, tree houses and lookout towers, all sorts of things where children can play. As well as for tots and for the younger children, we really want to encourage older children. So we're going to go for more adventurous play, deeper into the woodlands, a little bit of an assault course, or at least an adventure course. There'll be a maze, and then there will be lots of areas, or at least some areas, where people can just build dens and feel free to use the woodland in a more free-ranging area. And we target that on areas of lower conservation interest. Building countryside confidence. So that's for those people who don't really go to the countryside very much. We'll invite them in, and we'll use lots of tactics to invite them in. And when they're in, we'll just be able to have a site where people can enjoy in a very easy way the countryside and gain confidence so that they can eventually just park up pretty much anywhere in our uplands and go for a walk. Like most of us can already go for a walk, but just have the confidence to be able to do this. A lot of people will know from lockdown how great a walk in the wood is. It's great for your mindfulness, for your well-being, and that's certainly an agenda we'll progress. And we're also looking at the site as a wider green infrastructure project. So for the Ramsey itself, a really great site to live. Having green infrastructure, that really is incredibly important for inward investment and for the quality of life for the local people. So it'll be something to shout about for Ramsey, and that the people of Ramsey will hopefully be really as proud of the site as the site adds to them. The ladder of engagement then is kind of an industry term to describe how when people start using the countryside, we can engage with people to increase their engagement in the countryside. And what we've got on this site is essentially two halves. At the hairpin, we'll have a site where people can just roll up in their cars, their cycles, or just have walked in and use the area in a fairly unstructured, spontaneous kind of way. There'll be little bits of interpretation, but mostly it'll just be about good quality paths that get people out into the woods without too much interference, with some way markings so people don't have the worry of getting lost. It's as simple as that, an intuitive experience. Towards the other end of the site, what we want is to engage people and bring them in and allow them to experience more profound levels of engagement, really. So less spontaneity and more directed kind of educational and interpretive and creative ways. So things like a holiday, an outdoor classroom for school children, the potential of nature holiday play schemes. So during the holiday times, children coming in and having active play schemes there. An adult education centre. Now, Leigh is really championing at the bit to develop our adult education abilities around the island. And I think the Ramsey Hairpin has got a brilliant potential to be a home for that, for us to have a small classroom there or a training room from where we can launch anything from charcoal drawing through to coppicing, through to mindfulness sessions, a huge range of adult education experiences. And what we really want, and I think it's something that's close to the heart for Viv, is a new home for the Northern Group. So I think our involvement in Paul Dewey has eased off over the years, and it would be great for the Northern Group to be able to extend its membership and to have a more active role. Beyond just the sharing ideas of nature and infusing people about nature, but actually getting out there and doing things and helping out, and hopefully being able to cross that demographic divide so we can reach out to people like sixth formers, other people, to have a much more varied experience. And then finally, it's for the planet as well. So we will be planting perhaps 10,000 more trees, creating maybe another 20 acres of woodland. We would like this to be a natural carbon centre of excellence. Now, what that means is it's really a place for us to be able to talk to the landowning community, whether your land is a small garden or a huge farm. We want to be able to talk to you and say, this is how you can cram more carbon into your land and still keep the wildlife and still keep all the beautiful benefits of a woodland, but put more carbon in. And there are lots of techniques that we want to share with people. So a showcase forest garden. Now, a forest garden will essentially be a small garden the size of a Chelsea kind of Chelsea show garden, and just show that in people's back gardens, you can create something that is great for wildlife, great for carbon. And through to the more technical things of demonstrating farm carbon, the different techniques that farmers can use to be able to put more carbon into pastures and into other parts of their agricultural business. And finally, creating biochar. That's a little pet project that I'm really excited about, which is turning essentially wood waste into charcoal at very high temperatures. Now, this charcoal can then be incorporated into the soil of the forest or of new forests and in pastures as well. And that will lock up carbon for 1,000 years or more. So hopefully that will create another way of managing land for carbon. Now, that is my presentation. Oh, here we go. What I'm going to do now is hand back to Leigh. Leigh, do I have to hand back to you, or do I let you grab it back? Now, I'm just trying to work out. Sorry, pressing buttons and things
Hello.
aren't happening.
If you just...
okay, you've got it.
That's all right.
Are you back in control, Leigh?
You can hear me now. So just... Yeah, so first of all, just stop, if you wiggle your mouse at the top of the screen, Andree, you can have the option to stop sharing your screen.
I've got it, yeah. Sorry, I just lost that button. Okay. Right, I'll mute myself,
and then
Leigh.
I think, yeah, and you just need to remake me the host, I think, unless you've done that. Yeah, no, you need to rename me the host. So if you just click on participants, and then you can find me in the list.
Oh, hold on.
Everyone can smile at this. The
okay,
whole world is learning how to use Zoom better now. I have control.
And I'm
Thank you. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look in the chat first of all and see if there's any questions come in. Yeah, we've got a question from Liz Charter. Thanks, Liz. So I'll read the questions out, Andree, and then if you unmute yourself, I'll let you answer them. So first question from Liz is, how does carbon lockup and biochar creation sit with leaving dead wood for invertebrates and fungi? Oh, see, oh, and I'm going to... We do know what we're doing. Bear with me. I'm getting to you. I'm getting to you. There, you can unmute now.
Okay. Thank you for that, Liz. Yeah, that's it is a constant balance between deadwood, which not only is great for wildlife, but it adds carbon to the woodland floor. And it is a difficult balance. There will be elements where there will be no easy answers. But essentially, where we're harvesting the larger conifers and we're using those and milling the larger conifers for various construction uses and other uses, just to make sure that the conifer timber is useful, all of that waste wood, that would be biochar. Also, because we're going to be doing a lot of agroforestry, what we'll do is have things like pollard systems. So in pastures where we have pollards, and the pollards will be on a 3 or 4 year rotation, the timber from that would be natural biochar material. Clearly we would always have the difficult decision of what should be biochar and what should be deadwood. The native trees, I think we would err towards a lot more of the deadwood side. And the non-natives, that will perhaps be less useful as deadwood habitat. They're still useful for the carbon balance, but the long-term carbon is better in biochar, would go towards that. As I think you're intimating, it's a very difficult decision to make and a fine balance.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a question from one of our volunteers, Sophia. Evening, Sophia. So Sophia's question is, how will coppiced wood be used? She's recently had an exam question on coppicing, and it's interesting to know how it will be utilised in the Isle of Man as a local example.
Okay, so traditionally on the Isle of Man, hazel coppice was used for smoking herring, but that's vile stuff, so I don't think we'll be doing that. Now, for my personal ideas, I think most coppice is best done in the context of Leigh's short courses. So when we're doing adult education courses, one of the most fun things is to turn hazel coppice into hazel hurdles and bean sticks. And if we have members of the local public signing up to do these courses, to manage our coppice woodland for us, and maybe paying us to do that, that's a double hit for us. That's brilliant. But I think there will be a market. There's an increasing market for hazel coppice. If any of you ever watched Gardener's World, it's strewn around with hazel, woven hazel bits and pieces, be it bean sticks, be it little woven hurdles. And I think here on the Isle of Man, there will be a market for it. We don't want too much hazel coppice. Probably about 6 or 7 acres will be around the area where I don't think the wildlife will benefit much more than that. So it's very intensive management. It takes a lot of management. And that will be a good balance for us. But yeah, turn it into things like bean sticks and hazel hurdles and use for hedge laying. These are all the traditional uses. We carry on with that.
That's great. Okay, they were the 2 questions. I'm just going to, last chance, anyone for a final question for Andree now. We might come back to him. No, last chance for a question for Andree now, I think. So I'm just looking at the screens. I don't see any hands waving. Andree, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I'm going to, on there. And so next one up is Aron, our Carpet Man Bird Warden. So Aron, I'm going to make you the host. You have control.
Okay, so hopefully everybody can hear me. I'll just are you seeing that okay? Yep. Okay, so 2020, an unusual season on and off the calf, and then back on again. So this is a sort of a brief summary of our season, which began on the 6th of March when Dan Woolard and I arrived at South Harbour. We were accompanied by Rob Fisher, who was our assistant volunteer warden for the season. We quickly settled into the process of opening up the observatory after its winter hibernation and beginning the sort of array of tasks that sort of lay ahead of us for the season. The first couple of weeks were very much dominated by a series of storms as Ciara, Dennis and Ellen swept across the Irish Sea and battered the calf. And one of our first tasks was clearing away a couple of quite large conifers which had fallen over during the winter and were blocking the pathway or the track down to Cow Harbour. Despite those sort of challenging weather systems, there were a number of good birds in the first few days. And we had a pair of Canada geese arrived on the Dub. They were there on the 7th. They were just the 16th calf record, obviously quite a common bird elsewhere, but the calf, they're quite rarities. We also had a black redstart which frequented the lighthouse areas for a couple of days. March actually turned out to be a really good month. We got 74 species in the month, and given that we finished the month sort of early, the 74 works out as the second highest number of species recorded in any of the last 10 years. Weather conditions started to sort of improve as the month went on, and we saw the first of our summer migrants coming through. So the calf is certainly very well known for its goldcrest migration, and good numbers of goldcrests started to move through from the 8th of March. These were followed by our first summering migrants, so chiffchaff from the 17th and the wheatear from the 20th of March. Unfortunately, we were not able to see the month through, as I said, and just after 20 days of being on the calf, we were required to leave again, owing to the unfolding COVID-19 pandemic and movement restrictions that were being enforced on the Isle of Man. Not knowing if we would be able to return for any of the remainder of the season, we were collected from South Harbour and transported back to the main island, following a couple of sort of hectic days of repacking and dismantling everything that we'd done over the past few weeks. Once we were off the calf, Dan Woolard made his way back to his family home in Essex, whilst Rob and I remained on the main island. Frustratingly, we then sort of experienced probably one of the best periods of spring weather in recent years, just as at a time when we couldn't actually get out and enjoy it, other than perhaps sitting in the back garden. However, we were able to use the period of confinement constructively, and I set about creating a photographic record of the observatory's historical ringing data. Once this task of taking over 6,500 photographs was achieved, and having recruited and trained a small team of volunteers, we then set about adding these records to our data set. By the end of June, we'd achieved an input of over 35,000 individual records, covering some 85 species. There's still a long way to go before we can upload all the data into the BTO database, but at least the possibility of losing the data has now been avoided. Although coronavirus had reached the Isle of Man in March, the strict lockdown procedures and closure of the borders instigated by the Manx government meant that the situation was brought under control relatively quickly. And by the end of May, life on the Isle of Man was beginning to return to some form of normality. In early June, we were allowed to make the first of several day trips to start undertaking some of the seabird breeding counts around the Calf coastline, as well as making a start on monitoring some of the shag and the razorbill nests at our two main colonies at Keener Holby and Jibdale. And then finally on the 18th of June, both Rob and I returned to the Calf to restart the season. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing border restrictions, it wasn't possible for Dan Willard to return with us at that point. However, Rob Fisher stepped up and took on the estate warden's duties until Dan was able to rejoin us on the 13th of August. Our return was just in time to be able to assess some of the breeding seabird populations, but unfortunately much of the spring had been lost, and with it valuable data on migration and breeding numbers for many species. One consolation was the capture of a red-breasted flycatcher on the 19th of June, just the second bird caught after putting back up the nets around the observatory. For the fourth consecutive year, the island hosted a summer in great skewer. However, this year there was more than just one, with at least two unringed birds that were regularly seen around the island, often harassing the gulls on Kaga and along the east coast. Additionally, birds were often seen visiting Kitterland, one of which was a colouring bird photographed on the 16th of June, which had been ringed as a nestling on the Isle of Canna in July 2015. This species is gradually expanding its breeding range southwards from its stronghold in northern Scotland, and has now colonised several uninhabited islands off the west coast of Ireland during the 1990s. More recently, the species has bred, I think since 2010, on Rathlin Island in Northern Ireland, and it would seem possible that the Calf might be the next place for them to colonise. As recently as 2015, the common buzzard was classed as a scarce vagrant to the Calf. However, since then, the species has colonised the main island, and it has now increased in its frequency of occurrence on the Calf. Following a group of 5 seen around the Withy in March, there were odd records of singles seen soaring over the Calf during lockdown. And on our return in June, it became evident that birds had obviously tried to, or had summered on the Calf. And although no breeding attempt was actually found, it would seem likely that this would be another contender as a breeding species in future years. And finally, a probable female rosy starling was found near to the observatory just before dusk on the 6th of July. This was watched briefly before it flew off west, and this constitutes just the 4th calf record, but occurred at a time where there was a large number of these birds across the United Kingdom. A number of accommodation improvements to the farmhouse had been planned to start before lockdown. Obviously, this was interrupted by the lockdown process, But as these included essential improvements to the fire safety at the observatory, the opening of the guest accommodation was delayed until late July. And this allowed the necessary works to be carried out. Several weeks of complete upheaval ensued as a new bathroom suite was fitted. Gas pipes and electrical systems were removed and replaced, whilst there were a number of ceilings and walls which were reboarded and skimmed. Whilst the schedule was quite tight, everybody sort of pulled together and all the work was achieved just in time for the Bowers family to make their annual visit, their 22nd consecutive year of staying with us on the calf. On our return, it was noted that the invasive horsetail at the mill pond had taken advantage of our absence and had completely overtaken the surface water, as you can see on this slide, just a very, very small amount of water left. A huge effort was needed to remove this horsetail, and on the 15th of August, a team of 6 volunteers from local company JTC helped sort of kickstart the project. Throughout August and September, we gradually continued to clear the offending vegetation from the pond by digging out the roots and the rhizomes of the plant and then dumping it away from the pond. So it was a long job, one that required a lot of effort from those that carried it out. But hopefully by digging out the roots, next year we'll see a reduction in the density of the plants, and obviously the numbers we hope will be well down on this year. We also attempted to dig out some of the silt that had accreted over the years, which again has reduced the size of the water area that is available. This was last done in 1989 to any extent, so this was again a fairly major task that we tried to achieve. Although we made a good start to it, there's still quite a lot of work needed done to remove silt from the pond, and this is going to require either a very large team of volunteers or maybe even machinery capable of moving the tons of silt that needed to be moved from the pond. We quickly sort of settled back into the routine of hosting different groups from early August. And August certainly proved to be a very busy month as a lot of people, a lot of islanders chose to actually visit the calf, given that they couldn't travel very far further afield. I think a lot of people took the opportunity to visit the calf for the first time. Storm petrels, the bird in the middle of the slide, and Manx shearwaters are very much a feature of the summer nights on the calf. Sorry, let's go back. Members of the storm petrels, their numbers sort of gradually increased through July and into August, and actually resulted in one of the best ringing totals of the species for a number of years. It's a particular pleasure to be able to share the sort of nocturnal activities of these two enigmatic species with the guests that are perhaps hardy enough to venture out with us during the sort of small hours of the night. The slide on the right shows a family group that came out with us and were completely awestruck by the Manx shearwaters that we were able to catch and show them. Summer's relatively short-lived on the calf, and even when we've still got birds breeding, we start to see autumn migrants moving back through. This obviously means that we get an increase in the numbers and the variety of the species occurring. And early August produced this stunning wood warbler up at the top of the picture of the slide, and a juvenile long-eared owl, which you can see on the left. The juvenile long-eared owl almost certainly would have been bred somewhere sort of fairly close by on the main island. Early September saw the arrival of the Manx Wildlife Trust SEAL volunteers, so Molly Kirk and Brisha Harkin, who were with us for the next 8 weeks. and they worked tirelessly over those 2 months, checking out all the coves and inlets around the island. This often required commando-style sort of belly crawling through the bracken and heather in order to gain the much-needed photographs of the seals. And this led to them getting an excellent 61 pups and also being able to identify at least 50 adults. We're also joined by Krista Worth, a long-term volunteer for the autumn, and with her assistance, along with sort of shorter-term help from Sandra Kegan and Di Swain, we were able to tackle a large number of tasks. So these included drainage ditching and track repairs. Quite large quantities of stone were transported from South Harbour and used to reinstate and improve the sort of vehicle tracks through the glen and at the triangle up towards the lighthouses. Bracken control and heather management, they're an ongoing task that we have to undertake each year, and these were continued with areas at the Twin Fields cleared, as well as creating a number of new fire breaks across the island, obviously in the hope that if we ever did have an outbreak of fire, we can then much more easily contain that. It also enables these tracks to be used in the event of an emergency if we need to sort of access areas of the island which don't normally have tracks going to them. These and also the existing paths that we have are often flailed during the summer so that we sort of keep the vegetation down. And the flailing of bracken was also carried out along the east coast, where we wanted to clear areas that might then be colonised by Manx shearwaters. The cutting of the bracken in these areas helps to remove the dense layers of bracken litter that's sort of accumulated over many years. And we think that this may be a deterrent to new pairs moving into some of the areas around these areas where the bracken is dominant. So we've managed to clear some of those. We did it in a sort of a mosaic pattern, so leaving some areas with bracken because we know that these are also favoured as nesting sites for eiders. Non-toxic bait monitoring is one of the sort of major tasks I'm taking throughout the season, with approximately 300 bait points situated across the calf. And these are checked every month for evidence of longtails. Obviously, maintenance of these is needed as we go around, so replacing the plastic tubes and the canes that often get lost due to the strong winds. We also managed to get a trip over to Kitterland in September. And this was again done to sort of monitor the bait points that we have there. And for a second successive season, we found no evidence of longtails on Kitterland. We were feeling rather hopeful that we were going to be able to go a whole season without any sightings of longtails, when unfortunately one was recorded on a compost heap on the camera trap that we have set there in late October. Efforts to trap the animal before we left were unsuccessful, so obviously this is something that we need to have as a high priority when we get back onto the calf next spring. Autumn is always an exciting time on the calf. We have large numbers of birds moving through daily, and there's always a possibility of something rare or unusual turning up. 2020 was a record-breaking year for yellow-browed warblers. So we had 6 individuals recorded during late September and early October. Coal tits also arrived in above average numbers, and as I mentioned earlier, certain species are sort of unusual on the calf, but you see them commonly elsewhere. So on the Isle of Man, people probably wouldn't think twice about seeing coal tits coming to their feeders, but they're not necessarily annual on the calf. So to have a large number there is really good. And we also caught 2 birds that were showing characteristics of the Irish subspecies Hibernicus. It's only the 3rd time that this subspecies has been recorded on the calf, and only the 6th or 7th occurrence outside of Ireland, so quite an exceptional record. And then we had this fine male firecrest that graced the calf for about a week in early November. 2020 season will certainly be remembered for its impressive movement of chaffinches. If you can just see on the sort of top left-hand corner, the figure 6,317, that's the number of chaffinches we recorded between sort of middle of September through to the middle of November. And that compares with 2019 when it was 2,392. So pretty much, 3 times the number. And even lower in 2018 when it was only 1,866. So big numbers moved through this year, and we had a single day where there was just under 1,000 birds recorded on the 4th of November. And this resulted in a record number of birds ringed. We ringed 812 chaffinch during the year, and that beat the previous highest total of 584, so really smashed it with that big numbers moving through. The picture of the birds on the ground there, that was just taken from outside the observatory kitchen window. This was a day in late October where the weather had grounded these birds, and there was literally hundreds of birds feeding in the back garden. It was quite a low cloud and a little bit of drizzly rain, and the birds couldn't actually go anywhere else. But they stayed around until the cloud cleared, and then they moved on. There are many people involved in making life on the calf as enjoyable as it is. 2020 has been a particularly challenging year, and the turmoil created by COVID-19 brought about many challenges, not least the need for somewhere to stay during lockdown. Both my wife and I are extremely grateful to Tim Earl and Liz Charter, who stepped up and allowed us to stay at Whitburn sort of during our exile from the calf. As ever, we're indebted to Steve Clegg, who's continued in his father's footsteps of delivering our weekly supplies on Scrail, as well as transporting various contractors, visitors and sheep to and from the island. The need for support is essential, the need for support and essential provisions is a must on the calf. And as such, we're particularly grateful to Lara Howe of Manx Wildlife Trust and Sean Murphy of Manx National Heritage for doing their utmost to ensure that we have everything that we require. However, it's the amazing volunteers and the visitors that make the calf a great place to work. Without them, we would not be able to achieve as much as we have in this year. Okay, that's the end of that, so I'll stop the sharing. Got to find you now, Leigh. There you go.
Thank you, Aron. Fantastic. We've got one question for you that's come through, and the question is from Roxanne Oldham. So if you find them, how do you get rid of longtails?
Well, unfortunately, there's no other way than we put out kill traps, which are humane, but they will actually there's a snap trap which will kill the animal outright.
Thank you. I'm just, oh, hang on, let's see, there might be one more question. Question from Jeanette. Evening, Jeanette. Aron, were you visited by any greenfinches?
Yes, we actually had probably more greenfinches this year than we have had for about 7 or 8 years. Not huge numbers, but they certainly seem to be making a comeback.
Thank you. And I'm going to say the last question for Aron, because I'm conscious I need to manage time. Thanks, Liz. Another question from Liz. Can we quantify the benefit of longtail control yet on ground nesting bird numbers? And actually, I do know there's a wonderful stat on the shearwaters, so without stealing your thunder, off you go.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously Manx shearwaters were found breeding in 2000. There was just one pair in 2000. We now have probably somewhere in excess of 650 to 700 pairs. So yeah, getting rid of longtails has been a key thing there. I don't think the Manx shearwaters would have come back as strongly as they have. But it's also benefited lots of other species. So wheat ears as a ground nesting or burrow nesting species, we're now around about 40 to 50 pairs, whereas when longtails were prevalent, we probably only had about less than 5 pairs. And then, you know, all the other species like shag, razorbill, they'll all definitely benefit from not having longtails.
Thanks, Aaron. And Liz, thanks for the leading question, because I'm sure you're aware, I know you know that, but I think that's a really great example of the impact that Manx Wildlife Trust, through our Wardens team, and the work that Lara and Aaron and the others are doing on the calf of man with the shearwaters, with the longtail control. And we are fingers crossed that we might get puffins nesting back. Aaron, that's brilliant. Thank you. I shall mute you. Okay, so I'm on. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, evening everyone again. Let's just, technology. No, bear with me. Let's try that version. Okay, now if I do that, game on. So we've talked a little bit about the strategy. Just to reiterate what Viv said right at the start, we do have a new strategy. We did this through lockdown, and we actually did it through a series of Zoom conversations with staff, trustees, and a few external stakeholders. Wonderfully, this mirrors very much the conversation that's now happening across the whole of the Wildlife Trust movement in relation to a wider strategy for the Wildlife Trust. And just to remind some of you, or inform some of you, that Manx Wildlife Trust, we're a Manx-governed independent charity in the Isle of Man, but we are part of a federation of 46 wildlife trusts across the British Isles, and the other one that's not part of the UK is Alderney. So we have a strategy, and as Viv said already, we want to create more places for wildlife. We want to enable nature to improve the wider Isle of Man environment, and absolutely it's about people. We want to inspire people in the Isle of Man to act for wildlife. So how are we going to do that? So first and foremost, we're going to focus in the Isle of Man. We're very proud to be partnering on our UNESCO Biosphere status, and we see that as a banner, a tool, a badge that we can collaborate with others on. And there's various initiatives now that Manx Wildlife Trust are involved with under the heading of UNESCO Biosphere. So very much everything we do is going to focus Isle of Man. But beyond that, as I said, we are one of 46 wildlife trusts across the British Isles. Now, what's interesting is when you look at a map of the British Isles, the Isle of Man is slap bang in the middle of it. And it's also slap bang in the middle of the Irish Sea. So strategically, we are extremely well positioned within the whole of the British Isles to provide important data sets. So that absolutely shows and highlights why the Calf of Man Bird Observatory, slap bang in the middle of the Irish Sea, is such a key data point for collecting biodiversity biological data. And then lastly, we are part of the globe, and we have some global ambitions to have small impact. So we might be one of the smallest wildlife trusts, but we're also part of a club, if you like, of overseas territories and Crown dependencies. So we've recently joined the UK Overseas Territories Conservation Forum, and that consists of all the UCOTs plus the Crown dependencies, ourselves and the Channel Islands. So within that, we are actually one of the biggest small islands. We're one of the most wealthy small islands. With our biosphere status, we have a thing that Manx Wildlife Trust might actually help the Isle of Man become what a small island, sustainable, good model looks like. So absolutely our ambition is on 3 scales. Key for us, our first area is around a nature recovery network. What does that actually mean? Well, what it means is it means more places for wildlife. So, for example, it might mean more meadows, more forests, more woodlands, more nature gardening at home, wider hedgerows, wildflowers planted on the road verges, all these areas that we can add into what we hope will become an accumulator. And discussions with the Isle of Man government, the Department DEFRA, we're talking about jointly about setting up an accumulator that individuals, organisations, companies, businesses can actually do a bit more in their land for nature in the Isle of Man and add it to our island total. So that could be an amazing thing going forward into next year. A key part of the Isle of Man and the work that Manx Wildlife Trust do is on our nature reserves. And we couldn't do this without Tricia, our Conservation Officer for Reserves, and also our team of midweek muckers. That's not all of them. There's certainly Alan should be there, who just wasn't there that week, and there are others. But we have a team of muckers who are out Tuesdays and Thursdays maintaining our reserves. Now, our reserves are 24, 25 if you count Crossags and the Ramsey Forest project. They are wonderful, special places, diverse habitats from Close Sartfield to Cronkeybing to others right around the island and across the island. But their total area is 0.2% of the Isle of Man. The agricultural land in the island is 88%. So we absolutely want to cherish our nature reserves and ensure that they are maintained to high conservation standards. But we're also focused on how we can work with the farmers to get them to make small changes in what they do to benefit nature on a big scale. And we're delighted this year, that's Viv holding our memorandum of understanding that we've signed with Manx National Farmers Union. We've had 2 meetings with them already. There's a new agri-environment scheme going to go live shortly. It's an exciting time for agriculture and nature and the environment in the Isle of Man, and we're right in that conversation. So the potential of getting a small change over 88% of the island could be a huge win for nature. Nature-based solutions. So in effect, how we can use nature to enhance the environment for all. Key ways that we're looking to do that is through peat preservation and restoration, through woodlands and more forests, and also through blue carbon, through seagrass. There could be a whole talk on each of those. The example I'm going to give you there, that's one of my colleagues, Sarah Hickey, and what she's doing there, she's actually probing the depth of peat, and she's doing work to measure the upland peat. So she's currently doing 2 metrics, depth of peat and whether there's sphagnum there, which is an indicator as whether the peat's still growing. And Sarah's actually spent the last couple of days, I've been looking over her shoulder in the office, creating a map of all the data points that she's got. And she's got about 5,000 hectares that herself and her volunteers have already mapped for the island. And that gives us, you know, it's overlaid, she's compared it onto satellite imagery, etc. So there's quite a detailed depth map now of about half our upland peats. Now that is an amazing tool that we've got for the island to then help a judgment. And to give you an idea, that's about 50% of the upland peat. So amazing project. And I could, you know, Andree's already told you some of the work that we're planning around trees and more forests. And if Lara was in the call tonight, maybe she'll be in the next one and tell you a bit about what we're doing with seagrass, because the Isle of Man's an important place for seagrass also. Connecting people to nature. Now, this might be the only slide I've got. So on the far left of the screen, there's Dawn Colley, our education officer. And this is actually a group picture there. There's 2 or 3 staff in that picture. And Sophia, I know you're right in the middle of the shot at the back of one of our volunteers, and Lara's there as well, one of our marine officer. But these are volunteers that run our Festival of the Sea in Port Erin. And of course, this is my first year in the Isle of Man, so everything's new for me. But the Festival of the Sea, and I won't be a shrinking violet, I've seen a lot of public engagement activities and events and shows over the years. And the Festival of the Sea is outstanding. I think we had nearly 5,000 people engaging with marine life. And that's just one example of some of the great work we do. And, you know, again, it could be a whole presentation on just describing the work that Dawn does around schools, adult education, citizen science, etc. How can we inspire people to love nature and then hopefully do more with it? And it's a real important thing for me personally, massively important for Manx Wildlife Trust. Working with government's also important to us, you know, in partnerships generally. So I won't go in detail on all those pictures. I'm going to focus, actually I'm going to focus on the top left one, which is probably a big picture of a table with some people around it, but there's a lot going on in that picture. So in that picture, on on the far side of the table, there's myself and Andree, who you heard speak earlier. And in the middle of us two is one of our interns. So that's Simon Sheath, and he's one of 3 Department of Enterprise summer interns that we've had working with us, helping us with our work. And Simon's been doing some fantastic research into developing a carbon offsetting plan for the island. And on the right-hand side of the picture, you can't actually see the lady with her back to us, but she's the lady that's now Ali's leading the climate change team. And to her far right, that's Richard Lowell, who's the chief executive of DEFRA. So that is an example for those of you that are not based in the Isle of Man in this call. I know there's at least 2 or 3 of you. So we might be a small island in some ways, but we have direct conversations with the Chief Minister and senior people across the government to try and drive that change. So that's a great example of carbon offsetting. And I could talk about, there is actually the Agricultural Minister in the top right, Geoffrey Boot, launching the Agri-Environment Scheme. Bottom left is a group of us going out walking the Heritage Trail, and that's a new project in the island with the Department of Infrastructure that Graham, one of our colleagues, and Ray are working on now in terms of interpreting it. And the bottom right picture, lastly, that's a new group that we've been part of if you like, the genesis of, really, an environmental education group. And everyone in there is an organisation that goes into schools delivering environmental education, everything from Bill at Beach Buddies to Jen at Whale and Dolphin Watch, Manx Birdlife, etc. So we're all coming together now to find ways that we can actually do it better together. How can we create resources? How can we deliver the things that will enable the next generations of young people in the Isle of Man to really understand and champion nature and the environment? So some great examples there of government collaborations. Marine is something that I'm an amateur. Some of you will know that I dive. It's not my background. My background is plants, but I certainly love the ocean, and the Irish Sea around us is spectacular. You know, we signed memorandums of understanding with Whale and Dolphin Watch. We're close to signing one with the Basking Shark Watch. We're hoping that we're going to be the providers of sea search in the island. And the one picture I'll dwell on is the top right one. So the lady on the right, that's Dr. Lara Howe. Lara, one of my team, and Lara's our marine officer. And next to Lara is Dr. Emily Baxter, and she leads the Northwest Living Seas Initiative for the Wildlife Trust. Now, actually tomorrow is the first time that we're aware that there's actually going to be a meeting of all the wildlife trusts, not just from the English coast, not just the English counties that border the Irish Sea, but also Wales, Scotland, Ulster, and ourselves are actually having an Irish Seas Wildlife Trust meeting. So we're very, very excited about that, going back to my earlier point that we're slap bang in the middle of the Irish Sea. I've come from cultures of signing memorandums of understanding. And actually it's a really strong statement. So talked about MNFU, I mentioned the Whale and Dolphin Watch. This again is certainly up there. Probably the most important thing we've signed this year, or I've signed this year, is a memorandum of understanding with Manx National Heritage. So fantastically important organisation in the Isle of Man. We already work closely with them on the calf. So the calf of Man is Manx National Heritage property. We're the people that work for them delivering the bird observatory. There's the Balaf Currachs, there's education projects, there's Action for Wildlife, etc. So we've got an MOU with them. And again, things are lining up now. So on Monday, myself, Edmund Southworth, the guy stood up next to me at the back, is the director of MNH. And our 2 senior teams were having lunch together, and then an afternoon next Monday of talking about how we're actually what we're going to do. So we've got an MOU, we've got some initial working, but what are we actually going to do next? So again, a really exciting conversation and great people to work with. I'm not going to say too much about the calf. Aron's given you a great presentation. What I would say is that it's a jewel of Manx nature. And I've already shown you why it's important in terms of its data right in the middle of the Irish Sea, but just as a special place. And again, it's an exciting conversation with MNH now about what's the next stages on the calf. Myself and Lara have already started to draft up a research plan for the calf that goes beyond the birds. You know, already there's work done in non-avian species, be it Lepidopteran. Do we need to measure freshwater eels? Is it lizards? What else do we need to be doing? How do we get universities involved? How do we get interns in there? Should we have an Earthwatch project there? There's a lot of potential for the calf that we're keen to explore, and I know Aron would agree wholeheartedly on that. Little exciting story about the Conservation Fund, and I'm going to embarrass Katie again because I met Katie at the Zoological Society of Scotland and I know she's in the call. So I spent 2 years working based in Edinburgh Zoo, and there learned a huge amount about zoos and wildlife parks, etc. And I know for some people in conservation, you know, extreme end, the Born Free Foundation would say, you know, you shouldn't work with, you know, potential animals in captivity. What I would say, personally, I think there's audiences that go to zoos and wildlife parks that would never go to a nature reserve. Many, many people will go there, and it's a really important role to engage people with nature. So we have a Currachs Wildlife Park, some wonderful people, Kathleen and Liz and others that work there. So we're delighted to be working with them now. And they've actually, through their own conservation fund, have chosen Manx Wildlife Trust. So they've been funding projects abroad, such as rhinos, gibbons conservation, etc., for many years through donations at the wildlife park. But they're now funding 2 conservation projects in the Isle of Man through Manx Wildlife Trust. One of those is Manx Shearwaters. So they've given us 5-figure sum from their conservation fund to go out and get thermal imaging camera trapping equipment so we can monitor more of the birds as they fly in and out at night in the season. And they've also funded us another 5-figure sum to start doing freshwater mussel research. And that's because there's a little pea mussel or a pea clam that you can find around the Currachs near to the wildlife park. And that's an important story for the island. And then the other species are the pearl mussel. So real 2 great projects and a great partnership working with the wildlife park. We've done a load of digital stuff this year. I think the world has become more digital because of COVID. And actually, massive steps forward. Just the fact that we're having a Zoom call tonight. You know, we were joking last night at a board meeting. When we had our first board meeting in lockdown, you know, from the board, I think 2 just couldn't do it, and they came in. 3 others telephoned in, and there was a couple of blank screens on the wall, where now everyone seamlessly joins with a picture videoed in. So it's definitely taken us forward. We have a new website now that Graham and Ray have put together, and many of the team have contributed. And we have a .im URL, which is important to us. We've got an online shop. Please go and buy bespoke Manx Wildlife Trust clothing when you've finished this call. We're currently looking at how we can redesign the website and probably make it even better. And one excellent example of digital comms is the Calf of Man Observatory Twitter account. I know they've got Facebook, and as we do, but if you follow one channel, go and have a look at the Calf of Man Bird Observatory Twitter account. In fact, no, go to the Manx Wildlife Trust website and have a look at the Calf of Man webpage that Graham and Ray have put together with some fantastic films that they took of Aron and the team doing various bits of work on the calf. So digital's gone up, digital magazines, there's so many things now. So lots more to happen. And that's a picture of Lara. We do consultancy, and that's one example of Lara monitoring the black guillemots, and that was part of a mitigation against some of the silt dredging that was going on in Peel this year. So consultancy is important to us, and it's important to us in terms of income generation, but it's also massively important to us in terms of doing what's best for nature, and the 2 can go hand in hand. Andree's told you about the Ramsey Forest project. What else can I add to what Andree said? Well, I think to embarrass him a bit, he's been working pretty much solo on this project for 6 years. And suddenly now we're to a place where, you know, like many things, sometimes, you know, the opportunity for some funding is a game changer. And we are having a conversation now about the potential to actually realise some of this vision. But it could be an amazing place. You know, the TT course hairpin, visitor engagement, biodiversity conservation, not just in new species, but also just physical abundance of more wildlife and nature, be it bluebells or birds. And then the option of actually having more trees and doing more for carbon offsetting as well in education centres. So we've got high, very, very high hopes for this project. Nearly done. So governance. If you read our current magazine, if you're a member, and again, to reiterate what Viv said at the start, we're now recruiting for new trustees, and we are keen to cast the net far and wide. And one thing I'd say to those of you that are listening in the UK, I think Graham's put it live today. So if you go to environmentjobs.co.uk, we're advertising there, and the world of Zoom now allows us to do that. So potentially, if we can recruit trustees from the UK for some of the posts, maybe they come across for one meeting a year and join the rest by Zoom. So we want the best people to come and help us here. And we've got some fantastic people in the Isle of Man who have already stepped forward. So we have high hopes that we'll get the right people. And it's a real opportunity for people to help steer, sense check, encourage, you know, and strategically direct what Manx Wildlife Trust does in the future. And it really is important that we get some, you know, new people to fill the vacancies we've got in council. Membership. Many of you in the call are members. We love this graph. Graham sent me this graph. What this graph is, forgive there's a lot of detail going on here. I'll point you to the highlight. This is membership growth across 46 wildlife trusts since April, so pretty much since lockdown. Now, the flagship statistic on there, that many of them have got less members now. The one that's recruited more members is us. So we're actually top of the leaderboard in membership growth across 46 wildlife trusts since April 2020. Now, part of that is clearly because the Isle of Man has not been in lockdown for as long as it has been across in the UK. But I think it also shows just how much Graham, Ray and the rest of the team have been really championing Manx Wildlife Trust, from badges to new website to wonderful videos that Dawn and Ray have been doing and Lara's been doing, and really getting the messages out there. And it's having a genuine impact in our membership. And what I would say to everyone that's on the call that's a member, if you do one thing for us this year, go and persuade someone else to be a member, because that doubles what we've got. And it's not first and foremost about the money. You know, one of the strongest things that RSPB have when they go and knock on the door of the UK government is that they can quote they've got 1.3 million members, so they get listened to. So next year is going to be the Isle of Man elections, and if we could turn 1,000 members into 2,000 members, we would have a far, far, far stronger voice for nature in the Isle of Man. And I think our ambition, my personal ambition, was why can't we have 5,000 members out of 90,000 people? So I think there's a real opportunity for us to, you know, for people to help us champion nature and give us a stronger voice. But isn't that wonderful that we're top of the leaderboard of 46 wildlife trusts? Well done, Graham and Ray. One thing that we brought back this year, then those of you that know the Wildlife Trust office in Peel, that when you walk up the stairs, if you go to the dizzy heights of the top floor, there's a trophy on the shelf, and I picked it up one day, and it said Manx Wildlife Trust Volunteer of the Year, and it was last awarded, and I think in about 1990 something. So we brought them back this year, but there's no cups now. It's not about a trophy, but it's about recognising volunteers that have really done amazing things. So I've worked in many organisations with volunteers, be it botanical gardens, horticultural colleges. The Edinburgh Zoo had a massive team of volunteers. But the volunteers at Manx Wildlife Trust, it was set up by volunteers. I have never worked in a place that so fundamentally, depends on the volunteers that help us out. So there's few examples there. So be it the volunteers in the shop, be it the volunteers that help Graham in the office, John's in the picture, you know, be it the volunteers that do our midweek mucking, the calf volunteers that work with Aron, including the seal volunteers, and I'm probably forgetting loads of others, but the Festival of the Sea, etc., etc., etc. The people that deliver the magazine, I could go on, amazing. But because we'd had a gap, we had the opportunity this year to do a bit of catch up. So we actually presented 7 awards this year. 3 were for annual awards, but there were 4 lifetime achievement awards as well. And I could single out anyone in there. But the fact that we could recognise some of those people have been doing for 20, 30, 40 years for Manx Wildlife Trust was beautiful. So we're going to keep that in the culture. Okay, that's me done. So that's just another image of the staff team, or the bulk of the staff team, right at the top, the calf team, the Festival of the Sea volunteers, there's our shop volunteers there, etc. So people are so important to us. Please keep listening, please keep advocating for Manx Wildlife Trust, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and look for questions. Let's have a look. So I've got the first question from Katie. Thanks, Katie. She says, what's the next step with your conservation education team, Leigh? Well, interestingly, probably quite a bit. We're certainly looking to develop some adult education courses. So within the Wildlife Trust movement, bizarrely, there are no wildlife trusts. You can't do a certificate in wildlife gardening or wildlife observation or anything like that. So we're looking to potentially trial some pilots here in the Isle of Man, and conversations today around that, and another one on Friday. So that would be the first one. But ultimately, simple rules, interesting topics by nice people in nice places, and people will come. So I think we've got a wonderful place to do things here. And if it wasn't for COVID, I'm sure people will come across again and do courses with us here. Does that answer your question? You can nod at me. I can see your camera on. I've got a, where are we? Here we go. Mark Fitzpatrick. Is there a common understanding on the implications of being a biosphere for the presence of non-native species? And there's a bit of a nudge there on wallabies. Now, interestingly, there's a long wallaby conversation to be had on the island. I'm sure of that. We had another conversation today, 2 or 3 of us. I think I heard a rumour about wallabies before I arrived in the Isle of Man, but there are a lot of wallabies here. And there's an awful lot of people that go and see wallabies. And there's an awful lot of people that just sort of don't talk about wallabies. And there's a conversation to be had. So Andree, if he was still here, would say that they're spreading. I think, you know, but we don't know. So be it research, etc. I think we need to find out. Andree's back. The kids have gone to bed. He's got the kids to bed. So wallabies is an interesting topic, but another non-wallaby example of a exotic would be peacocks, peahens. And I know at one of our nature reserves, there is a potential issue with peacocks going in the ground nesting bird season and potentially doing damage. So to answer your question, Mark, to my knowledge, and Andree, if you wave at me, I'll bring you in if you can answer it better than me. I don't think there's any specific implications of biosphere around non-native species, because most biospheres will be riddled with non-native species anyway, and I don't think they actually have a specific line in there on there. Andree, shake or nod at me if you've got anything else to add. No, I didn't think so. So Mark, I hope that answers your question. I've got a comment, not a question, from Kathy. I'll just read it out verbatim. Well done everyone for a very impressive and informative presentation. I was always aware of work within schools, but this is a major step forward. Thank you, Kathy. Mark thinks that wallabies should all go back in the wildlife park. Well, you might not be alone in that. Could be the best wallaby walk round in the world, maybe. There is just a comment, a question there about family members or membership opportunities. Yep, so I've already talked about members. We'd love you to recruit more members. We're currently reviewing exactly in terms of Wildlife Watch membership, but we would encourage individuals, couples and family members to join us. And if you want any more information, please go and have a look at our website. All I would say again is that it really does make a difference to us. I think, you know, that voice for nature is really important, and so yeah, please join us or encourage someone else to. Ruth, it looks like you've just put lots of plus signs in your question box without a question. I don't know if there's a question from Ruth. Comment from MJ Tucson, thank you for this fascinating webinar. Will the recording be made available? Yes, it will. So I know Graham's been recording this and I'm sure we'll be putting that out onto YouTube and then putting a link out through our social media channels, probably on our news on our website as well. So yeah, it will absolutely be shared. Okay, so thank you to Viv and thank you to Andree and thank you to Aron for speaking this evening. I'm doing a last look at the chat to see if there's any questions, any last questions or comments from anyone. If not, I'm just gonna say thank you very much for joining us for our first evening webinar. I suspect this will not be the last one, and Andree and Aron will probably be delighted to have ticked this one off, and they can encourage our colleagues now to come and do the next one. Thank you all for joining. Keep well. Good night.